if I didn't commit tax fraud. And the people won't know. The people won't
We'll
know.
never know. Yeah, checks in the mail though, man. You might actually get one. So
We'll see.
I'll get nothing. But
welcome everyone to another edition of the Flashback to the Track podcast. As always, I'm James, that's Mark, and we are presented to you by our great friends at Blue Emu, providing you with fast, effective pain relief. All right, it works well on your tired muscles and joints. It's fast, and you won't stink. And you know what, Mark? Where can you find some Blue Emu at?
well, you can find it at lots of major retailers all across the United States, and you can find it on Amazon. So you don't have to leave your house. You can be safe.
Yeah.
Get Prime delivery same day sometimes. So.
Yeah, just be like, hey, Alexa, hit me up with some Blue.
Don't say that too loud, man, because like she'll hear you.
It's pretty cool. You know, like the future, how you can just like shop and just, you know, grab things basically on a voice command through your phone. You don't even have to put any effort into, you know, actually going and buying a product. Shopping's so lazy nowadays.
It really is. You know, I kind of buy like everything on Amazon now, which I feel bad about because like, you know, you read stuff and people are like, billionaires are bad. And then, but like, I don't like going to the store, and it always has the best price. So I just do it, you know, and it shows up the next day. So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think a big part of it too, like, you know, you don't want to like, you don't want to make the warehouse workers like work so like, I don't know, so much like a Chinese sweatshop, you know what I mean? And it's the way it's run, but like, you also know you're giving them a job, and you know you're supporting them a little bit, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's a double-edged sword.
That's a tough thing. You know, people are always like, you know, you got to support your local businesses. Well, your local Domino's is a local business, you know, owned and by franchise owners from your community that employ people in your community, you know, so that's a local business contributing to your local economy.
Yeah, to that point, like I was specifically like trying to look for a printer recently, and I'm just trying really hard not to go on Amazon and just search printer and buy it because it would be too easy. So I tried to go to, you know, Staples. I went to a physical Office Depot. I went to 2 Office Depots.
Wow.
None of them had anything in stock. It was basically the whole go buy it online, ship it to the store, and you know, it's like one of those like double-edged swords again, because like you're supporting your local branch or local, you know, franchise, but then again, it's a corporate business.
Yeah, but you know, and sometimes it's nice to go to a brick and mortar like store and buy stuff. Like I do like that, you know. But a lot of the time, like I'll just order it. Like even with like, well, think about what you and I do. Even with cameras, James. Like I don't go to the store and like try it out in the store.
There's very few camera stores too.
You just order it. Yeah, we're down to like 2 major chains here, and that's it that sell cameras. So you just like order it, and because you read the reviews and you take the risk, or you rent it for a weekend and see if you like it. So
yeah, because I just got the A1 from Sony, and I bought that through my camera store, but I do that all online. But then I have to drive over an hour to Sarasota to go pick it up at the camera store. You know, it's nice to support my local business.
That's a nice camera store. I've been to that camera store.
Shout out to Johnson Photo Imaging. They've been hooking me up since college. Super nice people.
James took me to Johnson Photo Imaging before we went to Homestead in 2019, and I bought stuff there. So
it's a cute place. Their prices are a little high, but sometimes they get good deals. But like I got my camera there, but it's like I gotta wait 10 days.
Very, very knowledgeable. So you're not gonna have it in time for next week, James? Or
yeah, I figured I wouldn't. I figured I wouldn't, which was cool. I still have like another one on loan, so it's no biggie. But like I'm excited to use it. It wouldn't be for this weekend that I'm most excited to use it. It's actually like other stuff. Like if I went short track racing and stuff, like how they're saying the banning's gone now. I'm like, I really need to see this with these really crappy like stadium lights they use at short tracks. So yeah, that's one thing I'm excited to use it at. But you know, man, it's another week on this podcast, and we're gonna talk about another race. But
we're gonna go horrifically off topic and talk about cameras and pizza, and then come back to racing. You know, that's what we do here.
I bet everyone enjoyed that. They were probably like, you know, I feel the same way about my local Domino's too. It's like you should, but then you know, those probably are locally franchised. So, but anyways, so yeah, this week gonna have some fun and get into some sports cars. They have 2 doors. They don't have 4. because that's a sports sedan then.
And you don't have to go through the window. The door actually opens.
Yeah, that's right. There's real doors, possibly more or less than 5 lug nuts. Who knows? But yeah, this should be a good one, man. It's not a stereotypical like race two that we're watching. We found some good, interesting content. I think this is really cool too, because like, now we got to dive in about what specifically this content was. And, I think it's pretty interesting of a topic and a good time period and era. So Mark, tell us what you chose this week for us to take a look at.
We are watching a 1990 episode of the IMSA Grand Prix Hour, which was a 1-hour show broadcasted on, we think, probably local affiliates near racetracks or maybe on a bigger sports network. We're not sure. There's nothing on the thing that really tells you. It's produced by Omni Sports. We know that, but we don't know where it aired. And this one's about the 1990 12 Hours of Sebring, but just the GTP cars, like recap and highlights, and there's some other stuff thrown in there to make a nice 1-hour piece of entertainment. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So it doesn't cover the whole race. It only covers one class, the top class that wins overall. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting piece, man. We had fun looking at it and doing a little research about what they talked about. So Sebring, James, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a nice little piece for us to make about an hour or two of content of or about. So it worked out perfectly. I think what's cute about this one specifically is to the point of like the fact that it's only following GTU. It's like how we did that one episode where we just followed DPI at the Paul Revere like 250.
Well, that wasn't our fault.
It's just like, we're on the same page though. Is this broadcast
like
back in the day?
We're only talking about GTP because that's all anyone cares about. Come on, all right, let's go. So, although that was the year in GTO that my boy Robbie Gordon won the race in class with Lynn St. James.
But somewhere where this race probably would be found again, other than YouTube, is at Merriam's. And if you know and you're in the know, you know that Merriam's exists. It's the place to eat at the track. And sometimes they have old races airing on the TVs inside Merriam's. And I could definitely see this race being on inside of Merriam's, and you're just sitting there, your crew, Team Penske's there, and you're all just captivated by it, because that's normally what happens at Merriam's.
I would love to interview Marion sometime and talk to her about the history of that, because
Cruise.
She's got a lot of stories, I'm sure. And Marion's is like, so fans probably like aren't super familiar with Marion's because it's not open to the public. It's basically just like a buffet tent that is at the track. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it hasn't been the last year or so, but in a normal year, it's just where all the teams, or a lot of the teams, go to eat. You pay a fee for the day for each meal, and then teams can go, and she's got everything. There's hot meals, and there's like bread to make sandwiches, and in the morning there's cereal, and there's everything you could possibly want, all for your dietary restrictions. And you can sit there and eat, pick up snacks, drinks. Sometimes she's even got the beers if it's like an afternoon one and it's the last session of the day. So
you got to be on the DL about that though.
Yeah.
All right. No one knows.
Don't tell anyone, but so, but yeah, it's cool. You can see some just cool cats there. You can see like, Roger Penske's like having lunch, and like Juan Pablo Montoya's hanging out. And I saw Colton Herta make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich there one time. So that was pretty cool, but mad respect for that.
If someone searches it online, search Merriam's and a poster, there's a really beautiful poster that was made about a year or two ago for her. And it just is like an illustration of her and her little corner, and everyone that's been there for almost like 30 years that she's fed.
Oh yeah, I've seen it there. Yeah.
It's a beautiful little poster.
It's really cool. So yeah, that's where people go to eat at the racetrack. So I had my first Marion's experience at Sebring in 2019. So so we're talking about Sebring today, James. So Sebring is a racetrack that you're very familiar with. You've been there probably more times than you care to remember.
For a lot of things, covered a lot of events at Sebring. And Sebring's a cool place. You could say what you want about it, but I mean, Sebring, it's got so much cool history from just not only its roots, but its foundation as far as like implication in racing history, because Sebring is definitely the birthplace of North American endurance racing. Right? It's basically the oldest permanent road racing facility in the country. I mean, it was built in World War II, Mark. I mean, you remember World War II, everything had to be built around then. I mean, we even had, the kids in the factories building things, because It's World War
Let's say
II.
I definitely remember World War II.
We all remember high school history class. Come on.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing about it is, like, World War II happens. You build this Air Force base, and it's basically just housing B-17, bombers, and just a training facility for B-17 pilots. So once the war was over, you had an open ground to do whatever you wanted with. And I mean, what's the most popular thing to do after the war? Go racing. So Alec Ullman, who was a Russian-American aeronautical engineer, he visited the track, and it was a part of a government effort to convert the military base to more of a civilian place. And, you got a lot of men coming back from the war. They've got adrenaline flowing through their veins. They've just lived through a very hectic time in their lives, but they still want to keep that adrenaline flowing. So they get into racing. And in 1950, Alec was able to bring this vision of a 6-hour event to life. That was held on New Year's Eve. Really interesting time for a race. I wonder how big of a turnout that was.
It actually had a pretty big turnout. If you look it up, It's 36 or 37 cars.
Wow. And in 1950, there was probably a variety of different manufacturers and cars out there. But the first official 12 Hours of Sebring, that didn't happen until March of 1952. But since then, there's been a 12 Hours of Sebring at the 12 Hours of Sebring, except for 1 year, because, there was something else that was happening.
Yeah, there's 1 year in the 70s didn't happen, but it's a really cool racetrack. It's had 6 different layouts since 1950. Currently, we're racing on the 3.74 mile version that we have actually used since, I believe, 1999, maybe 2000. I can get Jamie to fact check that. 1999 was when we started with the current layout, 3.74 mile, just a shade under 6 kilometers. But James, we really have to talk about the bumps. So that's what people talk about with Sebring. The track is incredibly bumpy. It's because a lot of it's never been repaved. That's the original airstrip. The front stretch area, that's the original airstrip which was made of concrete blocks, paved concrete blocks. So there's gaps between them. And you drive over that and you hear the bumps. During the WEC race in 2019, when the hybrid went by, all you could hear was it bouncing off the blocks. It was really interesting. So teams say that it's one of the best tracks to test your stuff at. You can test your shocks there because if they can survive there, they can pretty much survive anywhere. So I've had a chance to walk the circuit, and it's really cool to see that there's so much history just in that. It's weird to say there's history in concrete, but there's a lot of history in that concrete. You think when you stand there and you see that it's never been changed. It's adopted the moniker respect the bumps. Sebring will use that a lot in their promotional campaigns. Got to respect the bumps. And IndyCar teams actually use the track to test for temporary street circuits because it's very similar to the kind of road, so in street circuits they'll go to where they're incredibly bumpy. So, and you can't test on a temporary street circuit because they're temporary. So they go to Sebring.
I mean, you mentioned the bumps in the front straightaway, and yeah, it's pretty bad in the front straightaway. But the real bumps you really have to respect, and the one section that you need to always have your guard up on is turn 17. The bumps in turn 17 are insane. Just before you get to the bridge, just after your braking zone, you see cars literally leave the ground. Not just the front suspension, the entire car, 4 wheels off the ground, just because of how aggressive the bump is, plus the stiffness of the shocks, the rebound, everything going on with these cars and what makes them so good. It's just fighting against something that shouldn't be. It's crazy to see that, man. I've always loved that about Sebring. It doesn't give you the stereotypical things to handle from a racetrack. It gives you everything that you can imagine, and then you didn't expect it all at the same time. That's why I always call it truly the last great proving ground. Because
honestly, it is
you can't find anywhere else. Not just on equipment, but on a driver. If you want to break in a driver, you send them to Sebring.
If you ask some of the best drivers in the world what their favorite racetrack is, a lot of them say Sebring. They love Sebring because it's hard to drive. It's a driver's racetrack, and it's it's interesting because if you drive into Sebring, it doesn't have the makings when you drive up of like, wow, this is a classic, like, you know, worldwide renowned circuit. But it is. When you're there on race weekend, you're like, wow, this is incredible. It's like a festival on this speedway that's just built on this airport. But there's so much history there, and you can like feel the history like as you walk around. It's really interesting. So if you ever get an opportunity to go to Sebring. You'll never regret going to a 12-hour. It's an incredible event, especially if you camp out, have some friends with you. Like we've mentioned the history, this track has such a crazy history. And over the years, the 12-hour race has been sanctioned by like a bunch of different championships. So from 1952 to 1972 as part of the World Sports Car Championship. And that featured like, that was the era where we had, you know, Mario Andretti and AJ Foyt and Dan Gurney and Ford versus Ferrari, and Ferrari dominated in the 50s and 60s. Then Ford won some races, and they were really using at that point Sebring to test for Le Mans, because the old moniker is you can go 12 at Sebring, you can go 24 at Le Mans for sure. And then in 73, IMSA took over the sanction of the race, but only for 1 year to start, because in 1974, as James mentioned, the race was canceled due to the oil and gas crisis. But don't worry, the fans still showed up to party, even though there wasn't a race, because the fans, James, at Sebring are legendary.
I mean, they're Florida people. Come on. It's
Florida
just like,
man,
you know,
showing up to the race.
I feel like, you know, when people in that area, they just want to cut loose, you know, I mean, you couldn't have picked a more perfect time of the year to do it, because it's spring break season. Basically, not only are you going to get a bunch of people in Florida, but people throughout the country will come and flock to this race. I mean, it's been rated as USA Today's, you know, premier events to go look at. It's for a reason, not just the fan interaction, but just like what the facility gives you as far as like being able to experience something different than just a motor race. So that's part of its history. But man, the biggest thing with IMSA's sanctioning period is it was during probably the golden era of IMSA, as we'd all like to call it, the GTO and GTU class era. I mean, some of the most sophisticated, fantastic cars of their time, iconic. I mean, we all had them as posters as a kid. I mean, they were just insane supercars from the 80s. I mean, come on. I mean, who doesn't love the Porsche prototypes from back in that time? And especially with the drivers that were driving them too. So you had literally a golden era during the 80s and I'd say up into the early 90s. And like Mark said, this race had a lot of different sanctioning bodies or sanctions that were running it. So in 1999, the American Le Mans Series would take over of the race. And then during that era, we got to witness some of the most dominant reigns from specifically Audi, who won 8 consecutive 12 Hours of Sebrings from 2000 to 2007, running the R8 and the R10 prototype programs. Man, those cars just look so sick. They made prototypes look legit. And, you know, you don't just see open cockpits like that anymore. But ALMS, go ahead.
Not a fan of the open cockpit, man. Like, really? But Audis looked cool. Like, that's the thing. Like, I never liked open cockpit prototypes because we used to have closed prototypes. All prototypes were closed. And then someone in the 90s was like, nah, man, we don't need roofs. Forget about that. We'll make them like radicals, guys race at track days. And then up until 11, 12, then we got closed prototypes again. So much safer.
I mean, you think about it, it's a beckon back to the days of Can-Am and the founding, you know, period of sports car racing globally and in the US. So I definitely get where it is, but like, man, especially in the early 2000s, prototypes just looked atrocious. And then Audi, like towards the end of that decade in the early 2000s and just 2000s, they really made the cars just look really nice. But unfortunately for ALMS, they ran their course until 2014 when NASCAR, Grand Am, ALMS, they merged what was the United Sports Cars Championship, then turning it into IMSA's WeatherTech Sports Car Series as we know it today, which has been at Sebring, holding the 12 Hours of Sebring ever since. And I don't see them going anywhere, Mark, because NASCAR is also the owner of this track, if I'm not mistaken. IMSA and NASCAR own this facility, right?
They are the owner of the track, yes. And Sebring gets a lot of use even when there's not. They pretty much have stuff every day because Florida weather, you can have track days pretty much any day.
And it doesn't matter the weather. I mean, if it's wet, dry, you're going to learn something at Sebring, so it's valuable to be there. And, you know, to Mark's point, you know, if you got an opportunity to spend some cash on a track day, do it at Sebring, especially with a Chin track day event or something like that. drive your car on that surface and gain some respect, and maybe you get to learn a little bit about your car too.
Have you ever driven the track, James?
I've never driven it other than on Sims. You know what they do is actually they do like parade laps where if you're there during some of these events, especially at Chin event, you can just go ride around at like 15, 10 miles an hour around the track and get to feel what it's like to drive on the track. So I would highly recommend that too to some people too. I haven't done it. I've done the track walk a bunch of times. I love walking that track. It's a beautiful track, but I've never driven on it, man.
No, I did a hot lap last year and that was pretty cool just to kind of feel it. But yeah, it's just in a road car, right? Just as a passenger in a road car, but it was pretty cool. And yeah, they do fan walks as well of the track, which is really cool. Like I really recommend checking it out because it's such a cool track to walk. And walking on racetracks is always like fun. It's just like I'm walking on the track. It's just weird. I just get this vibe when I'm doing it. I'm like, oh, I'm cool. I'm walking where they race.
I feel like it's really cool if you could really understand what's going on too, and like you feel where the rubber is, and you see the driving line, and you see the other little hazards drivers have to encounter, but you can't see it when you're just looking at the track from the fan section. When you're on it, it's a whole different ball game.
So James, we're talking about GTP cars today. So we have to give you some background kind of on the IMSA GTP era. So the IMSA GTP or Grand Touring Prototype class came into existence in 1981. It's basically like these rocket fast prototype cars designed solely for racing that don't have a road car equivalent. Like a GTO car is like Mercury Cougar, and you can like buy that, right? GTP car you cannot buy, except the Hendrick Corvette from the 80s. That was based on a Corvette, so that one you could buy. And if you want to learn more about that, we have a video about NASCAR teams that had sports car teams that you can check out. But this is a class that is beloved by sports car fans. It's always looked back as the greatest time of prototype racing, and people absolutely love it. There's some of the coolest looking cars with some of the most iconic liveries that everyone knows, and they're in lots of different video games, and they're just remembered so well. And there was cars from like, Nissan and Jaguar and, Porsche. And if you're not sure like what I'm talking about, like you'll know these cars when you see them. If you see a photo of them, like, oh yeah, I know that car. I've seen that before. The Jaguar XJR, the Nissan, ZX Turbo, and the Porsche 962, which James mentioned before, is really the most popular one at the time that lots of privateer teams fielded along with factory teams. And those cars raced for like that Porsche 962 was still like going strong in the mid 90s. So just really cool race cars.
Yeah. And I mean, I think another thing that's brought up the popularity of it, especially towards present day, is events like Goodwood, events like at Monterey, the Rolex Classic Car Weekend. And then you also have HSR. Historic racing has really given new light to this kind of series, and it's given a way for a lot of people who enjoy these cars a chance to, showcase what they can do on track, even though they might not be driving to the full 10/10s that the drivers did back in the day. But, newer fans can see it, older fans can reminisce, and it's just, it's calling back to the old days. It's kind of really cool then. And I feel like that's also helped to bring more love to the GTU era. But man, I don't know about you, man. I was a GTO guy. I just like the GTOs.
Yeah, looking back, I love GTO, but man, like GTP for me, like I was introduced to it with like through Gran Turismo video games. Mm-hmm. I remember like driving the Nissan ZX Turbo at like Le Mans in the video game and just like going 240 miles an hour and just having a blast. So,
well, I mean, you look at that era too, like, PJ Jones's qualifying lap at Daytona, what was it, 1990? That was a record that stood almost like 30 years.
Until 2019, when I think did Harry Tinknell break it?
Yeah, Mazda Team Yost.
Yeah, I think it was Tinknell broke it. Yeah, like crazy fast. And the track was a little bit different. The chicane in the backstretch was like a tiny bit different at the time.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing about to the point of those cars was how much of an extreme engineers and designers went with it, to try to push the boundaries, whether it was aerodynamics, materials being used on it, just components that were used within it. It just pushed everything to the limits, kind of to where we are today. I mean, not to say that we're not pushing the limits today, because we are, but I feel like it was just super extreme back then.
And so many of them were just factory teams too that just had money to burn, and they were just putting it together. Like the Nissan team, like you saw the Nissan team, the Jaguar team, like those manufacturers were funding those efforts, and they had the best drivers and the best everything trying to win these races. And we're hoping that IMSA will kind of get back to a point like that where everything's sort of factory, and but
I think too, like this time period, and one thing I always remember is like an Audi video I watched, specifically talking about their GTO program with the Quattro, and their whole thing was how it relates back to the road car. I feel like during this period, you could really have a lot that you learned from your motorsports program that you can plug back into your street cars and progress. Not to say that we've learned everything nowadays, but I feel like we're coming to a point where we don't need to have racing programs from our big manufacturers to push the boundaries of the road cars, which is a shame. But then again, also not too, because look at the hypercar series, dude. The hypercar series is definitely pushing the boundaries for what we can see in road car technology as far as like, renewable or hybrid energy,
And I think that's really where we're getting at now with kind of where the WEC is with hypercar and with what LMDH will look like in 2023. We're talking about the future. We're not flashing back. We're flashing forward, but
we're relating it to the past.
Exactly. As long as it all comes full circle. But
you gotta connect the dots, but I'm looking back, not looking forward.
We're in for some great things the next few years in prototype racing with, Ferrari, Audi, Porsche, all saying they're going to commit to the top class in the WEC. And, might get to a point where there's like no GT cars at Le Mans because there'll be like 60 prototypes, but, I'll be there for it if that happens. So yeah, it's looking, we're like, we might have a resurgence of this kind of feel like we had in GTP era where there's, 65 cars at Sebring instead of, 36. So
well, hopefully with that too, we get to see a resurgence of broadcasts like this too, especially from like WEC. Can you imagine WEC putting something on like this?
That'll be amazing.
Yeah. But this broadcast specifically that we're talking about, it wasn't live. Like we said, it was, delayed. So they had some time to polish it and make it look nice, but they made it a whole hour-long show, a good production. So it's about 40 minutes in total because you got to leave some time for commercial breaks. And during it, we call it the IMSA Grand Prix Hour. I think it's a good title, simple. And they own kind of Grand Prix, I guess, at that time, even though I feel like Grand Prix make me think a little more of open wheel racing.
F1, because F1's races are referred to as Grand Prix. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's brought to us by Omen Sports, or Omen TV Sports specifically. They would air the race, I don't know how long after this probably was put out, maybe like a couple weeks. But it was a good mixture of highlights from the race, but also great promotional bits and insights brought to us by the series. I don't know if like specifically the series worked with this production company to kind of like put them together, but it brought like insights into like what they were doing, plus historical facts about either the track or the series or some of their drivers too.
Because I in the credits, I watched all the way through the credits. He's like produced in association with the International Motorsports Association. So I assume like IMSA even back then was involved in kind of providing the footage of the extra stuff, coordinating it. The people featured in it. So we've got Don Westcott, who's kind of the host of the thing, and then we go to Bill Bowser, who's actually the Sebring track announcer at the time, and I guess he kind of like re-recorded that I think that broadcast like afterwards, kind of to fit the deal. You'll hear that sometimes in like documentaries, like they'll kind of re-record the
just do ADR after the fact, basically. Yeah, I mean it's not that hard. You just basically get a guy in a room and, they'll have the clips playing and then they'll just talk as like the clips play and then they'll just kind of like dub it that way and sync it all in. So I feel like that was a good aspect of it too. And something else about Bill, he's just like, he's in it, man. He gets you kind of in going with this. He's in his calls. So even with the parts he recorded, he gets pretty excited.
And I always wondered how that must be weird to like kind of record like after you already know who won. But like I had a buddy who did some play-by-play for like a Porsche series like 3 weeks later, and he's like, "Nah, man, you just put it on and you get into it and you call it. It doesn't matter if you know who won; it's still fun." So yeah, he did a really good job, kind of putting it together.
But James, it's like you're into it, man.
You just got to get into it. That's the thing.
Yeah,
you gotta live it. Gotta live in the moment. But we got to go into our favorite segment of the show. Strange starters.
What a strange person.
Mark, man, I don't know about you. All these people sound strange to me, but I don't think they fit our strange starter persona mold.
Yeah, because like there's in sports car racing, like everyone's kind of strange except like the main dudes. Because like there's gentleman drivers and team owners and all kinds of people, and we could have done like 30 guys. There's also 3 people in each car a lot of the time, so you've got lots of different options. But we stuck to just GTP because that's kind of what we're the piece covers. So I'll get us started, and the obvious one to start with is Derek Daly. And on the day we're recording this, happy birthday, Derek Daly. It's his birthday today.
Happy belated birthday.
Daly's originally from Ireland, and he was an open-wheel driver, like you'll see a lot of the drivers in this field. He actually drove in Formula One in the late 1970s for teams like Tyrrell and Williams. He started 64 Grand Prix races with a couple of fourth place finishes. Unfortunately, was never able to make it onto a Formula One podium. Eventually moved to kart in the 1980s and then on to sports car racing in IMSA. He also had a broadcasting career after racing, and now his son Connor Daly is a full-time driver in IndyCar. So Derek Daly,
the one and only father. He's your father. Next up, we have Bob Wallick, aka Brilliant Bob, driver of the number 86 Porsche 962 for Bruce Levin. Man, before Bob was a race car driver, he was a world champion skier and was on the level to compete with the French national team in the 1960s. But his true calling was racing, and he actually got to be a Porsche driver. He was a Porsche driver for the majority of his career. He won the 24 Hours of Daytona 4 times and raced at Le Mans 30 times. Unfortunately, he was never able to win at Le Mans. And Bob also was unfortunately killed in a bicycle accident at Sebring in 2001 when he was leaving the track after a practice session. So we'll dedicate this one to you, Brilliant Bob.
R.I.P. Bob. Next up, we have someone you've probably heard of, Hurley Haywood, and he's driving the number 296 Porsche 962 for Rene Herzog. And Hurley Haywood is an absolute legend of American road racing. He's one of the most accomplished sports car drivers in the history of the United States. He's won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 4 times, which I want to say is a record for an American driver. It's probably a record. I won't go on the record saying that, but like if you look it up, he's probably won it more than any American overall.
Probably more than AJ Foyt, at least.
Overall, like I mean, maybe class wins, but like overall, he's won it 4 times.
Yeah.
Your 1988 Trans Am champion, has 2 IMSA championships, and he's won the 24 Hours of Daytona 5 times. And at the time of this race, he might still be, I'm not sure. I couldn't find the definitive stats, but he was the only driver to win the 24 Hours of Daytona and the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the same calendar year. And Hurley actually also was drafted and fought in the Vietnam War. Fun fact, kind of in between his racing career. So
another example of someone who comes back from war, got that adrenaline going. You had these near-death experiences. You want to get back into it. Probably also too, because that's what he was doing before the war too, man. Next up, we have Henri Pescarolo driving the number 0 Porsche 962. That's another Porsche 962. Damn it. On 962s for Joyce Racing. It's a very popular car, like we mentioned earlier in the segment, and a number of drivers are driving Porsches. So the Porsche is probably the most popular car or manufacturer at this time in GTP. Now, Henri was a French racing driver, later a team owner, and he even started in open wheels and formula cars. And he was in Formula One in the early 70s. He even had a podium at Monaco in 1970. He's best known for competing in Le Mans for over 30 years. He's captured 6 class wins and 4 wins overall. He started his own team, Pescarolo Sport, in late 90s, but he never won Le Mans overall with his efforts. Though if you're a gamer and you played Gran Turismo back in the day, you'll probably remember seeing his cars in the OG PlayStation version of that game. Mark, did you ever play that one?
That's where I remember them from. Yeah, because they were green and they were really cool liveries. They were like green and blue, and they were sponsored by PlayStation. So that was like the thing that I always thought was so cool. I remember like playing all the challenges and trying to get all the money so I could buy the car. It was like a ridiculous amount of money in the game, but you know, that was the days, man. Those I look back on those teenage years playing Gran Turismo as like a big formative, really helped me form my love of motorsports, and then later watching it and wanting to work in it. So video games are big, folks. They really are. They're important to, fandoms. They really are. They help kids learn about stuff, honestly. So up next, we got Hans Schtuck, and we've talked about Hans before on the pod. He is driving the number 17 Porsche 962 for Dower Racing, and like a lot of the other guys we talked about, Hans also started in junior open wheel and competed in Formula One in the mid 70s. Even had 2 podiums in 1977, driving for Martini Racing. After F1, he kind of moved over to the World Sports Car Championship and IMSA. He was originally a BMW factory driver and then a Porsche driver. He's a 3-time Le Mans class winner, and he also won the 1990 DTM Championship, which is a German touring car series. And he competed in IROC in the 80s, which, as we said, we covered back in our podcast episode about IROC's road racing. So Hans Schtuck, he's always a factor in races like this, man.
He's like the coolest character from this time period. I love Hans Schtuck. But man, I remember Hans Schtuck more for those the GTO period when he's driving a Quattro. He's just a wheelman. Just shows how versatile he is to be in a GTP car at this period. Finally, bringing it up, we have one bad hombre. His name is Willie T. Ribbs, driving the number 99 Toyota Eagle HF 89 for Dan Gurney's All-American Racers. Such a cool name. It's like a little click.
All-American Racers is the coolest race team name ever.
It's like you're a posse. So it's really cool. Now, Willie, he is obviously an American road racing legend. Not just road racing, American racing legend. Just straight up. Just done. Willie T. Ribbs, American racing legend. Moving on now. He's won in Grand Am 17 times, and he's raced in the golden era of the series, running for Roush Protofab and for several Chevy privateers during his time. He's also run in IMSA GT, NASCAR, kart, and was the first ever African-American to qualify for the Indianapolis 500 back in 1991. And if you haven't, I highly recommend checking out his documentary, Uppity. It's still on Netflix. Adam Carolla's team did an amazing job on that. Mark and I took a look at it too with Christian on an episode of the podcast. Really great documentary. Highly recommend it. Even if you're not even paying attention to the screen, pay attention with your ears. You'll really learn something.
Willie T. Ribbs, man. That's check out Uppity. It's an awesome documentary. Like, you learn so much and get to hear kind of right from him and people that were there. Like, just what he went through as a driver. And unfortunately, he doesn't really factor into this race really much. But you can't not throw Willie T. Like, you have an opportunity to talk about him. We have to.
Come on, he's one bad hombre. Come on. And yeah, he didn't factor into it. So what? He's Willie T. Ribbs. He knows he's the best. Moving on to the race, though, because we got to get our little pre-race notes in. Mark, this is the final year that Sebring will be in a 4.2-mile configuration. So
it looks very different than how it looks now.
Yeah, it does. To Hans Stuck's point, the FIA didn't come in and put little, slow down, chicanes and little areas in there. Like, I see the back section of Sebring now versus then, and I definitely see that the track flowed better. It had better rhythm through that section with this longer layout.
Mm-hmm. 55 cars in this race, James. 55. When we're averaging nowadays in IMSA about 35. So 55 cars in this race. Only 49 made it to the grid, though. Some had issues in practice and couldn't start the race. Derek Daly's on the pole, though, in his Nissan GTP, and he actually broke the track record in qualifying, which still stands today because we don't use this layout anymore. So he's got the record on that layout for sure. But yeah, Derek Daly, man, and the Nissan. The other Nissan starting third. Those Nissan guys look super fast. But let's just get into this piece of content now. So we've got the green flag. It's out. We get some good highlights. Bob Wallick in the Texaco Haviland Porsche, by the way, incredible livery. One of the best Texaco liveries.
I love the fact that it's so simple because it's like black and gold, but they took that big, Texaco icon and put it on the back. I love that. But, forget you, Texaco. I know what you've done. I've seen it. I've seen it on Vice. I got you, Texaco. But we're going to ignore that because we're going to enjoy Brilliant Bob. He's out front. Man, I know your boy's Derek Daly, and he wants to grab the lead. He had a big jump on the start.
Yeah, he took the lead going into turn one. And then Derek and his teammate Bob Earl, they're hot on his tail by the time they get to the hairpin. The Nissan Turbo really kicks in the slow corners to get them to catch up. But that Porsche is just a little bit faster on the straightaways. And the really cool part about the highlights early in this race is that you get Bill Bowser really explaining each corner as they go through it and explaining the track of what the challenges are at that circuit. Okay, now we're in turn 17 and this is what they have to, it's really, really cool. So it's like entertainment, but it's also edutainment. We're being educated while we watch this piece. 2 for 1.
I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of face palms right now in the entertainment business because it's like that word has failed us so many times.
I use that word all the time, man. National treasure, edutainment.
But Mark, here's some edutainment for you. How about 4 laps? These GTP cars have already caught the GT cars. So the back marker GT cars are now being lapped just 5 laps into this 12-hour event. This is going to be a very, very long traffic-filled day for these prototype cars as they pass these slower GT cars.
And we get an early yellow flag. We get some pit stop action. Derek Daly brings that Nissan in. He's going to hand it over to Chip Robinson. But unfortunately, they had a flat right rear. Kind of complicated the pit stops. The team checked for damage. They lost a minute in the pits. But luckily for them, this race is 12 hours long. Plenty of time to come back. And let's take a minute now under this caution break to just recap some of the history of the 12 Hours of Sebring with our host, Don Westcott.
During World War II, the term international competition had a much more ominous meaning than it does today. Hendricks Field, on the site of today's race, was a training facility for American pilots learning to fly the mighty B-17. These legendary airplanes served America mightily during the war years, and many of the men who soon became decorated heroes learned their skills on the runways of Hendricks. In the early 50s, the world became sports car crazy, and Alec Ullman brought a different kind of warfare to what was now called Sebring Airport. Sports car racing, thundering sports cars with powerful engines, primitive suspensions that shook the tarmac as horsepower replaced air power. Sterling Moss, Lance Revenlow, and Sir Jack Brabham, that's right, Jeff's dad, were just a few of the men who sought to conquer Sebring's challenging layout. Now, 40 years later, the cars and the men are different. The course has gone through some changes too. But it's still Sebring, and its name still echoes with a power and bravado that was born here years ago.
All right, now we get back into racing. But shortly after that restart, the number 23 DSR Motorsports Porsche 962, driven by Scott Harrington, just stopped right on track. That's a shame. But Scott, he got out, jumped over the wall, looked okay, but
then they just left the car there.
Yeah, I guess that's what you got to do. Just forget it. But then again, having those wreckers and stuff, I don't think they had the same amount of wreckers they do today, where it's
I think it was done differently. It was done more like how Le Mans is, where if it wasn't in the way, they would just leave it there.
Exactly. If you're off the racing line and you're not in a precarious way in the racing area, you're fine. That's the thing. It's if your car quit, oh well.
The team's waiting all day. They really want to go home, and the car is sitting out in turn 14, but
and you got to wait to go recover it yourself probably, but oh well. Now, shortly after all of that, our leader in the number 86 Texaco Haviland Porsche 962, Bob Wallick, he and Cyril van der Moy, man, he's forced to retire so early just because of mechanical issues. Mark, that just says a lot right there. The fact that the fastest car early on in this race had to retire very early for mechanical issues. Attrition is going to be big during this entire event.
Yeah, this era of IMSA saw a lot of cars not finish.
Yeah, but the thing is, just because the car's out doesn't mean Bob Wallick's out of this race. No, man. He's going to go jump into another car, dude. Not just any car, another 962. So at least he's keeping it in the Porsche family, but he's going to jump into the number 0 Joyce Racing Porsche 962. Oh, man. Talk about some late additions to a lineup. How about, hey, man, you're out of the race. You want to jump in our car? Jeez. I don't think there's really an ability for that to happen in current IMSA regulations.
I think it needs to be a relief scenario. The driver has to be injured or something and can't continue, and you only have one other driver. And for safety reasons, they need a second driver because it's too far for one guy to drive.
Yeah, and in this scenario, obviously Bob isn't going to gain any championship points, even though he's now a part of this other car. I think, like, I feel like that wouldn't be fair.
Yeah, I don't know how it worked because we didn't actually mention this. So Derek Daly's driving 2 cars. So he won the pole in the 84, but he's also going to drive the 83. So he's in both lineups, and that was perfectly allowed back then. So I don't know. Do you just get the points for like the highest finishing one? Or do you have to declare which one you're getting points from? Because up until the mid 90s, like guys like Boris Said would drive like 4 cars in a 24 Hours of Daytona, and it was allowed. And you're still allowed to do it to this day.
I mean, look at today. Ben Keating, for example, he's driven 2 cars in the Rolex 24 in the past 2 years. But then again, Mark, Ben Keating, he's just a badass. I mean, come on.
He's in his late 50s and he's just balling. So he's the fastest gentleman driver in the field, and he drove an LMP2 car and an Aston Martin GTD car this year. Like, just insane. The guy drove, I think he drove like 16 and a half hours of the 24. Just unbelievable. So still a thing you can do.
I can't even consider him to be a gentleman driver because he's always like doing the big events, and he's normally running really well in them, not just like being carried by his co-drivers. You know what I mean? So that's another thing too.
To me, if you have a bronze, you're a gentleman driver. You know, it's just the way it is.
And then again, that's another thing too. Like, how do your co-drivers feel if you're just jumping into the lineup now? Does that probably ruffle some feathers?
They're getting Bob Wallick. I'm sure they're stoked.
Now pressure's on. You got to give that car back to Bob Wallick.
Exactly.
Now, talking about pressure on the track, man, it's been heating up. Great racing action. But you know what, Mark? Let's cool down and enjoy what IMSA has to offer you, the fan, at the track.
If you've been to an IMSA event, you know that there's more to a Grand Prix weekend than just racing. While the racing fans and the family are watching the time trials or the featured race, there's plenty to do on the midway, with its arcades and games, souvenirs, and culinary treats. This Camel GT driving simulator gives everyone a chance to experience the thrills of Grand Prix racing the way the driver experiences it, from behind the wheel. Using a computer-controlled electro-hydraulic system, the Camel GT driving simulator recreates the sense of intense acceleration and deceleration experienced by the driver when passing, cornering, and braking in the heat of Grand Prix racing. With a stroke of a golf club, Mazda gives everyone a chance to win a souvenir poster. Whether you travel in an ultra-luxury mobile home or call a tent your home for the weekend, camping in the infield is always a unique experience. There's something for everyone at an IMSA Grand Prix race. The next time you and the family are looking for a great weekend or fun-filled afternoon, come to the races. It's great family fun. See you there.
And James, that promo mentions, IMSA race weekends and the infield camping is a great attraction. But as we mentioned before, at Sebring, fans take that infield camping to a whole other level. It's notorious for just the parties. That we'll just leave it at that. We won't go into detail, but it's notorious for they're partiers with a racing problem, really, the fans.
Basically, it's a race, and it's a really big party, and there just happens to be a prestigious sports car race that's happening at the same time. Just happens. So I guess that's how people treat it. Back to the racing highlights, more or less Nissan's highlights, because it's just basically showing the Nissan team cars are leading. Now you got Derek Daly, who's taking the lead in number 83, but then earlier he was trying to battle for the lead in the 84. Mark, this is very counterintuitive. I'm lost now with Derek Daly just jumping back and forth.
From the 84, while in the 83, but he started the race in the 84. But you know what? As long as Nissan wins, I'm sure he's happy.
He's led now laps in 2 different cars in this race.
It's kind of like, yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like, I remember one year in the MLB, there was a guy who had at some point in the season been on both teams in the World Series. And by rule, he gets a World Series ring no matter which one wins. So he's golden. He's just, hey, as long as a Nissan wins, I'm going to get a trophy. So.
And that's the thing. There's a bigger effort in sports car racing than just the one individual car winning. It's about the whole team winning. And this is a very team driven move to have Derek be like that star in both cars at this point. Now, at this point too, we're going to take another break from the broadcast because, we got to hear from the drivers and as they tell us exactly what makes the 12 Hours of Sebring such an awesome race, and what makes it so challenging as well?
Hans, this is a particularly exciting race for you. Could you tell me why, please?
Yeah, first of all, because Sebring is my absolute favorite racetrack in the world. It is a racetrack which has not been destroyed by silly chicanes like FIA did with tracks in Europe. And it's a track that requires a big heart to drive. It really requires a lot of driving skill. And I won here 3 times already, and maybe it's a fourth time now.
Do you plan to employ any particular strategy to ensure that 4th win?
There's nothing you can assure in racing, I tell you that, but if you win it 3 times, you know how to do it. You gotta begin quite steady, easy with the car, and after 6-7 hours, when a couple of cars have dropped out of the race, and your car is still in good shape, then put the pedal to the metal, and then we see if we can win it.
Mark, you just gotta love Hans Schtuck. He just doesn't hold back, nor does he care about having a filter.
Not at all. Like, I loved how he said that, you know, Sebring's one of the last racetracks that FIA didn't ruin by adding a bunch of silly chicanes, as he puts them, and they kind of just let the track do its thing. So he threw some serious shade in his previous interview, and I respect that.
Hey, I mean, if there's anyone you're going to throw shade at, why not aim at the biggest sanctioning body in the world for automotive racing? I mean, come on. But you know what? Let's get back to this race. We're treated to some more slow-mo replays of a close call between Bob Earl and another Nissan GTP car. And while that was happening, he was trying to overtake this GTU car in the Camel Lights car. Mark, I don't know about you, man. Mixed class racing, it gets very hectic, very, very congested, and there's not a lot of room for mistakes.
Yeah, managing lap traffic is one of the most significant aspects of multi-class sports car racing. That's what I think makes it so great is that, you know, if you're in the top class and you're a prototype, you're in the fastest car, you have to understand that everything in your mirror is everything in your windshield is coming towards you at a high rate of speed because you are very much faster. And if you're those slower GT cars, you have to understand that everything in your mirror is coming at you, not going away from you. So you have to be respectful of that. But the thing is, the GTP cars are like, hey, you guys got to get out of my way because I'm the overall leader. But those GT cars are having their own battle in their own series, in their own class, you know, fighting it and having their own race. So you got to respect them as well. Now you get a lot of lights flashing now. That's my favorite part of sports car racing, when the prototypes flash their lights rapidly at the GT cars to be like, get the hell out of the way.
Yeah, at least there's a little bit of more innovation there, because like now at this period, you don't have that. So you just see these lights come up behind you and you're like, well, I'm just going to hold my line and see what happens. So that's, it's very scary to think about in this period. Now, another cool aspect about the IMSA Grand Prix hour is that we get some more fun segments to break up the highlights, but they're more fun about IMSA and kind of the partners within the sport. Specifically in this segment, we see Bill Simpson. Yes, this is Bill Simpson, the only man who will light himself on fire to sell his brand. He's going to talk about some of the innovations of Nomex and the Nomex racing suits. And man, Mark, the biggest thing I always remembered seeing specifically about Bill Simpson is the print ad, the Simpson print ad where he's on fire. And like, you know, it's just like, hey, it's proven tough, you know, Simpson racing products. This dude is crazy that he sells his product by lighting himself on fire.
Puts his money where his mouth is, right?
Yeah.
He's like, hey, this is the best race suit on the market, and I will prove it to you by lighting myself on fire in front of you.
It's such a 1950s salesman pitch.
Yeah. That's baller, man. And also in that piece, you get more fire stuff. We get to learn about fire spotters on pit stops. So to this day, IMSA still requires a crew member over the wall in any series that has live fueling with a fire bottle, like fire extinguisher, to watch for fires and put them out, because, you know, it can never be too safe. There's also a dead man over the on the other side of the wall that turns off the fuel if there's a fire. It can turn the fuel flow off, because unlike series like NASCAR, they use like a hose to put the fuel in and it comes out of a big tank. So it's definitely a little bit more dangerous in that way in terms of fuel flow. So always important to have those fire bottle guys, and we thank those members of the team for keeping everybody safe. You know, safety's big.
Yeah, especially those dead men. That's a very important job. Underappreciated job, but dead man, they save lives.
When we get back to action, we've got some bad news for a couple of teams, including Jim Busby's number 67 car. They're having gearbox issues. And then Bob Wallick comes spinning onto the front straightaway in that number 0 Yost Racing car, stalls it, and he needs a push back to the pits. Fortunately, it was right at the entrance of the pit lane, and he had one of the first pit boxes, so he didn't need much of a push. But the crazy thing is they stay green, and the crew members are out pushing the car off the track into the pits while the race is green. That's
well,
not
actually,
something...
those were corner workers.
So those are corner workers. Yeah, that's not something you're going to see today. That's not going to happen in a race.
Oh no, that would have been full course caution, and safety car incident, and you would have ruined a lot of races for people, and you actually probably would have been penalized or something for manipulating the outcome of the race. But back then, it's like, nope, you're kind of on your own. You gotta do what you can do to get back to the pits. But Mark, speaking of safety and how much safety has innovated over the years, let's talk about one of the first integrations of a very innovative safety initiative. It's IMSA's new Rapid Response Safety Team. It sounds familiar because it still exists today. Now, back then when this program was first introduced, it was basically a Porsche 944 equipped with, of course, flashing lights on the top of the car that would be sent out either during a caution period or during a local yellow, because there wasn't really full course caution periods unless it was a very serious incident. There would be more local yellows. They'd send this car out, driven by a professional racing driver, so it can get to the scene quickly and efficiently in a safe manner with a trauma specialist in the passenger seat. That's big. Think about this. Probably in this period during motorsports, the only places you probably find a trauma specialist would probably be a Formula One race and now an IMSA Grand Prix. Like, it just wasn't so common that you had to have a trauma specialist on site. So, they would drive up to the incident, stop, make sure the driver was okay, provide whatever they could with the tools that they had either in the car or just on site, and, just be able to help make that difference. Because when you're that trauma doctor, those seconds that you're there on site, those could be the difference makers between saving a life and losing someone.
Yeah, this was innovative at the time, man. Like, the car was driven by a licensed race driver. They could get out there really quickly. And now that's still kind of what you see with the AMR safety team. Oh yeah, that's
still a licensed driver that has to drive those Porsches. And they're still very fast. It's interesting that Porsche's kind of stayed with this too. And their involvement with just providing the safety vehicle. Because even like the SUV that's there today, it's a quick Carrera, or I think it's a Carrera, whatever the SUV is. It's fast.
Yeah, and it's great seeing how fast these safety crews get out there. And this was really like the beginning sort of genesis of putting an emphasis on that. The other thing in endurance racing, James, that people always want to know about when we talk about people who are new to it is, so multiple drivers drive one car, and how do they work together how does it work? Driver changes, what do they do when they're not in the car? So we get a little segment with Tom Ryan, who's the sports medicine director for the Jaguar team, to find a little bit more about that.
As the driver comes down pit road, immediately the driver gets out of the car. The first thing I do is I have a cold towel waiting for him to put around his neck to reduce the body temperature. I then take a pulse meter straight away, and it's quite easy to take his pulse. By putting it on his ear, it gives me an instant pulse. I get him back here into my mobile home, where I take off all his clothes, including his helmet. I put his uniform in to be dried. I take his helmet away, and I have it dried so that there's no body fluid whatsoever left in the clothes. I then check him over to see if he's got any bruising. If he has, I use ultrasound on him. I also use an electric massager, which is very, very good to stimulate the blood flow into the muscles. After I've done everything and checked him over and seen that everything is okay, I then allow him to lie down and rest. I do not allow him to sleep. Before he goes back into the car again, I put him in an exercise bike out there, and I bring up his racing pulse, so that when he gets back into the car, he's getting back fresh, exactly the same as if he's starting to race.
Mark, there's a lot that goes into managing their driver lineup, but not only that, keeping their drivers fresh. I mean, just to hear what he has to do, like massaging them, making sure they don't go to sleep, getting them back on a bike to get their heart rate back to where they were before they got out of the car. Dude, I never thought of that.
Especially back then with 2 driver lineups. You don't really see that now in a 12-hour race. It's very rare to have a 2 driver lineup, usually 3. But back then you have 2. 2 guys could split the car, or he could be Derek Daly. He could drive 2 cars.
I want to give a shout out though. I want to give a shout out though specifically to Tom, because he was doing all this in a Winnebago. Like, not like a plush, like nice thing. He was like, you know, massaging these guys, getting them all going like in a Winnebago, and like recumbent bikes on the outside. It's just like so makeshift, but hey, it worked, man.
So when we get back to our highlights, our guy Bob Wallick and his Yost team, fortunately, they have some more issues. They've got a flat and have to pit, but quick pit stop keeps them in second place. They're still in contention, so Bob could still win this race. And the sun's starting to set, and that's part of what makes Sebring great. The race starts at 10:30 in the morning, ends at 10:30 at night. You get day racing, evening racing, and of course you get nighttime running, which is always exciting. And as night falls, our guy Bob Wallick is back out front. He takes the lead from the Nissan team and is the 18th lead change of the day, which is one off the all-time record at the time. And James, don't forget to turn your lights on. They got the sign out. Get those lights on. You got to have your lights on at night.
Well, I mean, they're just driving. They're in the zone. They're not thinking about little things like that. So communication is key, and you always got to let the driver know what's going on. But, you know, here's another thing. We need to talk to Don Westcott and understand really more significant moments of Sebring history.
It was 1967. Ford came to Sebring with a new lemon yellow Mark IV, built and tested just for Sebring. Behind the wheel would be Bruce McLaren and Mario Andretti. Today, they would do wheeled battle with the winged Chaparrals, Corvettes, Ferraris, and Porsches. With the classic Le Mans start, the field was away, except for the Ford Mark IV that McLaren stalled and the Chaparral that would not start and required a mechanic's help. The early lead was contested by a new Alfa T33 and Charlie Kolb's Ferrari Dino. As the afternoon wore on, Spence and the Chaparral began his march to the lead. Meanwhile, the Ford Mark IV led the way, but at McLaren's first pit stop, the Chaparral took the lead. Mario relieved McLaren and lit out after the fleet-wing Chaparral. Andretti's Ford would regain the lead, and until dusk, the Chaparral and Mark IV, shadowed by Piper's green Ferrari, dueled through the 5+ mile course. But the pace took its toll, and at 6 o'clock, the Chaparral retired with transmission problems. As night fell, it was Porsche on the march in chase of the sprinting Fords. With just 30 minutes left, the Mark II Ford retired, leaving the Mark IV alone to battle 3 closing Porsches. But in the end, the Mark IV held off Stuttgart's challenge by a scant 8 seconds. A young Mario Andretti, the American from Italy, and Bruce McLaren from New Zealand would ride their Ford to victory lane. And that's the way it was at Sebring in 1967. Another great moment in Grand Prix racing history.
Since Don has gotten that history lesson out of you, or as Mark would like to call it, edutainment session, we're going to get back to racing. And just as we do, the rain is starting to fall, and that's going to really shake some things up because, you know, Sebring night racing is challenging enough. Now you throw rain in there? Man, talk about a fun, dangerous time. Emphasis on the dangerous part, you know, because it's fun, and then it got dangerous.
So Derek Daly is going to take in the Nissan story. He's going to take the lead back from that number 0 car of Wallick on the restart. But shortly after, the number 0, actually with Henri Pescarolo at the wheel, is involved in a hard crash with a slower GTU car. Fortunately, neither driver was seriously injured, although now 2 cars are out of the race, very good cars. Both were running second in their respective classes. So unfortunately for Bob, he's officially out of the race now. He can't go jump in another Porsche 962. That's going to be the end of his race.
Poor Bob. But we're going to go back to racing after this caution, and it's going to be the race between the 2 Nissans, Mark. The epic battle for the overall win, and then you have the V12 Jaguar back in third. We haven't heard or talked about the Jaguar much all race long, but they decide to try to stretch their fuel late in the race to challenge Nissan. But Mark, the gamble isn't going to pay off, and it's going to turn into a 1-2 finish for Nissan. The land of the rising sun may rejoice because Nissan has claimed the 12 Hours of Sebring for 1990. Let's hear from the man, Derek Daly. Man, you drove 2 cars. How did it feel?
I started in one car, finished in another. I mean, I think it's just a credit to Nissan performance technology that they can change their strategy so quickly midstream and still come away with success that we had today.
Very short interview there with Derek. Not much to say. He's just so elated.
I thought he'd be more excited. I let him in with a lot of excitement, and then he gave us nothing, Mark.
Well, he's tired, James. Drove 2 cars. So my question is this: Does he get 2 trophies? Does he get a first place trophy and a second place trophy?
No, but he gets one hell of a bonus from Nissan, dude.
I would hope so.
Seriously.
It's like, bro, does he get paid 2 day rates?
No, he gets like legit GTRs. Like he gets like the cars that are only available in Japan, and he's probably been sitting on them for years. But I mean, honestly, he is a very valuable asset right now in Nissan's program, and they're probably going to take care of their boy because he's a franchise driver for them. I mean, to put him behind the wheel of both of the cars to ensure the best outcome for both teams and for the entire organization speaks volumes to the type of leadership it takes to run a sports car effort, especially one that has such a big influence from the manufacturer.
Yeah, man, he drove an amazing race. The fact they drove 2 cars just blows my mind, like, honestly. And yeah,
it would have been crazier if it was like a GTP car and a GT car, like 2 totally different cars.
That'd be pretty baller. But to drive the 2 GTP cars that finish first and second, and for a team to employ a strategy like that and be okay with it. Now, I don't know what his drive time was in each car, because he was with Bob Earl in the 83, and then in the other car he was with 2 drivers, with Chip Robinson, and I believe it was Jeff Brabham was the other driver. So how much did he really drive in that third car? I don't know what the rules were for drive time back then. I'm not sure. You'd have to ask someone from that era. I'm sure there's someone in the paddock we could ask, but nowadays I think it's like there's specific drive times that you have to stick to in a car, and to get so the car is scored. You can't just like front load. One guy can't just drive 11 hours and 5 minutes, and one guy can drive an hour, So there's a lot of rules now, but I think I'm going to find out if you can drive 2 cars in one class still, because I think that's an interesting rule. I'm going to ask somebody at IMSA. I'm going to find out, because I really want to know. I know you can do multi-class because it still happens, but I want to know if I can drive 2 different, if I can hop in 2 different DPIs in a race. Well, not me. Someone who's good at driving.
Yeah. I mean, you can, Mark. It's called a simulation.
It's called being a gentleman driver. You can drive as many cars as you want if you pay.
You own them all, and you're the sponsor, and you're everything about it. Yeah.
And you can make minimum speed. You too can be a professional race car driver.
I think the biggest thing we always got to ask ourselves, what did we learn?
Yeah. What did we learn? Well, we learned a lot, man, because we got a lot of educational segments in this piece. So
yeah, we learned a lot about IMSA in 1990.
Yeah, we learned quite a bit. The big thing I learned was really the genesis of kind of like that sort of AMR safety team vibe. The Porsche 944 driving around with the trauma doctor, like that's something really interesting that I didn't know about until I watched this. I also didn't know that at that time they didn't retrieve cars that broke down that were off the racing line. They just left them there, and the driver could fix them. Now I might have to look that up, but I remember having this explained to me that from somebody in the paddock that back then those were the rules, but you could only go a certain distance away from the car, and then the car was called. It was out of the race. You couldn't call it back and continue. And that's still the rule at Le Mans. So if the car cannot drive back to the pits under its own power, it's out of the race. So you'll see guys trying to fix it and drive it back. So they did the same thing at Sebring back then. So that's kind of cool too. What did you learn,
this would be an era too, definitely, when they had like toolboxes in their car, like little 100%, things,
yeah,
little small things.
And you would see that the crew members in a golf cart would drive out and stand by the fence and yell at the driver what to do.
Yeah, right. Because like to your point, they could only do it, but nowadays at least there's a little more competitive edge for it. I think other than learning more about the drivers from the GTP era, because there's a lot of great like international names who world renowned and have great links and time starting in Le Mans, compete in this race. I think the biggest thing was understanding logistics and the side Tom Ryan brought, understanding what it takes to keep their drivers fresh during this program, what it takes to, keep the entire program running. That's really eye-opening. I feel like hopefully people can like watch those pieces and just learn, because there's so much that just goes into running these races not only just from the driver aspect, but the team, logistic wise, preparation wise. It's an immense effort that, yeah, a lot of cars might not have finished. I think the 12th place GTP car was out of the race, but still, like, to finish the race, the entire race, doesn't matter how many laps down you were, just to finish it, that's a victory for a lot of people. So I feel like that was really cool. It was really nice to get that perspective. And, you know, I also watched another IMSA Grand Prix hour after that one. And I was like, man, I might just kind of watch more of these. So I wish I would have had the VHS, you know, collection of all these episodes so I could watch them all, because it was actually kind of entertaining.
Yeah, no, these are really good episodes. And there's quite a few of them on YouTube from this era. I just want to actually, I didn't write it down.
I would recommend, if anybody wants to watch it's the GTP and the lights of the Nissan Grand Prix of Atlanta, which was basically Road Atlanta back in the day. It's crazy to me to see how like Road Atlanta is back in the day, because we're so used to seeing the tracks now, because we go to them now and we know how they look now, but to see them like when they don't have walls or like there's just no barriers,
they paved everything and ruined it, you know.
Oh man, it's just like, it's crazy. Even like Sebring too, like you see some of the sections where there's like no wall, or just like the guardrail really isn't there, where it barely is today. It's like, man, you just take more of appreciation for like how things have changed, how much things have progressed to be better. You know, people might knock and be like, oh, that's not racing back. Racing was back then in the day. It's like, you know, racing is whenever you're alive and you're living it, you know, that's your era, go for it, you know.
And a lot of the changes are due to safety. That's really the big thing.
It's all for enhancement of everybody. I mean, like even with like the Road Atlanta one and watching the Sebring one, man, just seeing how close fans were in certain areas. I'm like, I'm glad they're not that close nowadays. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
And even some of the places, like you think, James, like, so in the hairpin at Sebring at that time, there was no wall. Yeah. There was no tower there. So there's a photo tower now. And the photographers could go right up to like the track and shoot. Like it was just a chain link fence. Yeah. Could you imagine a prototype hitting that chain? They'd all be dead. Like it's crazy to think about, you know? And I talk to photographers now who are like, I wish we went back to those rules. It's my decision if I want to stand there. And I'm like, good for you. I'm not going to do that.
I mean, I like being extreme. And I think that's really one of the allures of doing this job is the extreme nature of it. But like you ask a corner worker, especially back in the day, they're going to be like, forget pushing that car off the track. That was the stupidest, deadliest job ever. You know, them risking their lives basically as volunteers to do that. And people are like, oh man, I'd like for it to go back because I like it my way. It's like, you have to understand that decisions usually have that domino effect to affect so many people in line. So, you know, yeah, you want to change it for you. Think about it, how it's going to affect everyone else, you know?
And take a moment to thank the corner workers at your local racetracks, because they're volunteers. A lot of them don't get paid. They do it because they love it. And you know what? Look into volunteering to be a corner worker, because it's really cool. You get close to the racetrack, get to be involved, and you get to watch racing for free. So be a corner worker.
I mean, you don't really watch it. You just watch what's going on and you take some shifts. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a really eye-opening thing to do, and you'll learn more and get a better perspective for that job. So finally, last thing to do, you got to rate the race.
You gotta rate this piece of content, I think, really, you know.
It's more of a content, because like if it was just a race, I'd be like, man, I didn't even see the whole race. How can I rate it?
Yeah, so, it's true, you know, but you can rate it based on the storylines, based on what you saw. I'm going to go 9, man. This was awesome. I loved watching this. I've watched it 3 times in prep for this, and I really enjoyed the history of Sebring, you know, the Hendricks Air Base, and learning about, like, from Tom Ryan about the Jaguar team and the trauma doctor thing, and just learning all these things, and also being treated to some interesting racing, cool storylines of Bob Wallick in both cars. Great battle. The Nissans finished 1-2 after starting 1-3. Derek Daly drove both cars. I gotta give it a 9. And it's the 12 hours of Sebring, James. 9 out of 10.
Well, I'm gonna go a little harsher on this one. I'm just gonna give it a 7. And here's why. I really, really enjoy the segment pieces. The race, I like it, but you know, I'm a GT car fan, man. I love GT cars, and there's no GT car action in here.
When they're getting hit by other cars, that's the only time you hear about them.
But even in this time period, it's a golden time period for GT. GTO obviously was a very big influential series too that IMSA had, or class that IMSA had to a decade earlier. That's why I have to go a little lower, because like I just love GT cars and I just don't get any of it. But I get Hans Schtuck, and that makes up for a lot of it. But the segments really bring it up. A lot of great insight that is brought to the fans, not only about the track, the series, the teams. Does a really great job overall. And then, I think the biggest thing you got to take from this is how odd of a time it was when the whole sports car racing split existed. Because, when there was like ALMS and Grand Am, and you kind of see in this piece, you have like the classic IMSA GTP watermark on the side, and they have the American Le Mans series logos on the side. And it's just weird to think about that time period, Mark, when sports car racing wasn't unified, and then there was like a split still kind of between the two entities globally in what kind of was the bigger sports car races in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I'd love to do just a deep dive and maybe do an episode on that at some point about like sports car racing. When James and I first started watching it, like in the mid 2000s, when we really got into Grand Am and ALMS, like they were separate series at the time. Yeah. Now we obviously have the United Sports Car Championship, or as it's known today, the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. But back then, when I first started watching 0506, you had Grand Am. They owned the 24 Hours of Daytona, and they had those funny looking Daytona prototypes. And then GT cars, which were a wide variety of GT cars. And then the ALMS had like the baller, like open cockpit prototypes that were rocket ships. And they had a bunch of GT classes, and they were really considered at the time the top sports car championship in the world. They were a worldwide sports car championship that raced, almost exclusively in the United States. One race a year in Canada, and sometimes they ventured out to other places. But they were the world's sports car championship for like 10 years. So until we got the WEC in 2012. But, unification needed to happen in 2014. It just made sense. Like, why would we keep competing with each other? So it just made sense. Same thing with IndyCar. And we talked about the IndyCar split last episode. So we should definitely do an episode on the sports car merger at some point, because that was a really, really, really momentous occasion.
Yeah, because it's not really there was a split per se. It wasn't like two parties were never
No, they just started
unhappy.
Separately.
Yeah. And it was two separate entities, because you had two places in the world that you had regulated events at. Basically, ALMS existed primarily for Le Mans. That's all it was about. But then it also had the luxury of claiming the 12 Hours of Sebring, the Petit Le Mans. A lot of the really true endurance races that.
Yeah, the Petit Le Mans was their race. It was their first ever race. It was founded by Dan Paynos, and that's where he built the series around. And yeah, we got to do some deep dives on American Le Mans, because what a cool series, man.
Oh, it was, yeah, for sure. But I think the whole unification of it, I feel like that was such a smart move. Bring all the races together, bring the classes together, allow people to run all these tracks, all these races, keep the rules the same under one sanctioned body. I think that was a great move. And you know what? NASCAR's all like, we got sports car racing. And they kind of do. They've owned sports car racing ever since Jim France and all the people there have really taken over IMSA. So it's been a great thing, and it's definitely a booming thing for sure. So, eventually, yes, we'll look at a possible merger of what kind of became the United Sports Car Series. So I think that'd be a good episode, but between that and then, I think we got some other ideas. Definitely want to go back to doing some monster truck stuff, man. I think the people want monster trucks again.
Monster trucks are pretty great.
They are pretty great.
I did enjoy that monster truck episode we did. It really opened my eyes.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I feel like we should do another one, but just a chiller one too. I wouldn't say the world finals, but not something like the 12 Hours Sebring equivalent of Monster Jam.
Yeah. We should just do like a Le Mans sometime. We're just it'll just be a 24-hour podcast episode.
No, what we'll do is when we get big enough, we'll just be like, hey, we're at Le Mans. Come hang out with us for 24 hours.
24 hours of just baller racing on a 13-kilometer long circuit. I got to get there one day, man. That's the dream. But Sebring will do. Sebring's an amazing racetrack. I'll reiterate that. Go to Sebring if you get an opportunity, because you will not regret it. Yes, it is in the middle of nowhere. Yes, it is incredibly hot. but I love it so much. It's such a great racetrack. Go check it out. If you get a chance to go to a 12 or even any other event, just do it. Like you'll have the time of your life.
Just go do a Chin Track day. Seriously, go look up when Chin Track days are at Sebring or even any of these tracks, and go try to do that. Drive your car on the track, even if it's like just one of those little parade laps. Get some perspective. So I think that's always a fun time. But we'll wrap it up this week. As always, we're brought to you by our great partners at Blue Emu. We'll provide you fast relief for your tired muscles and joints that won't stink either. Odor-free, made with real emu oil, especially with that Blue Emu Super Strength. Put that on your tired muscles and joints. You can get it at Walmart or Amazon. And Mark, you just got to scream at your phone and be like, Alexa, get me Blue Emu.
Don't say that too loud because she'll hear you and then order stuff.
I mean, I don't have any of that turned on. I don't even have Siri on my phone turned on. I don't want any of that.
Oh, I love Alexa. She answers lots of questions for me when I have a weird question like, Alexa, how old is Daniel Craig? And then she just lets me know, because sometimes I have weird questions like that. Yeah.
I use my thumbs.
Nah, it's a lot of sounds about work. Yeah. Be sure to throw your Blue Emu in your bag for this weekend, James. You're going to need it.
This weekend's nothing. This weekend's just chill. This couple weekends coming up, that's going to be big. But everyone, you stay safe. Make sure you find a way to get to a track when it's safe, because everybody loves to enjoy some racing action, especially in person. We'd all want to. We all need to do it safely. Wear your mask, sanitize your hands, wash your hands, keep 6 feet apart. But at some point, find yourself back at that track.
Yes, sir. And we got a cool episode coming next week. We'll won't say more than that, but it's going to be good.
Oh, yeah. It should be a fun one. But you know what? For this one, we'll wrap it up. It's Mark. I'm James. We'll catch you again next time around, because if you've noticed, racetracks all go in some kind of circle, even if it's not a nice symmetrical one.
Unless you're doing one of those point A to point B rallies. Then...
Or a drag race, yeah. Or a monster truck race isn't a circle either.
Oh, we just punched a bunch of holes in your theory there.
Oh, we're sinking. Goodbye, y'all.
Finger gun.